Good evening, everyone. This is Dennis Stedman. Welcome to the Lower Makefield Township Ad Hoc Property Committee meeting. We have the full committee assembled. I'd like to offer a special welcome to John Owen, who's joining us for the first time this evening. John, welcome aboard. We appreciate your interest and energy, and we could use the help, and we appreciate the supervisors expanding the board or the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have all members present, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. The first agenda item is the approval of the minutes from September 9th. Our secretary, Beth, could you take it away?
Should have all received this from Katie McVan. I hope you looked it over. It's a nice read, 25 pages or so, but it's very thorough. I greatly appreciate her doing all of that. Is there any corrections or edits to those minutes?
I make a motion to enter the minutes as is.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. You want me to do this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, passed. Back to you, Dennis.
Thank you, Beth. We're fortunate this evening to have a guest to present to us tonight. We have Jeffrey Marshall, who is just recently retired from the Heritage Conservatory. He has a wealth of experience in preservation, historical preservation, and in Bucks County. Jeffrey, I won't do justice to your background in this area. So if you could just give the committee and anyone from the public participating a thumbnail sketch on your background, and then we can go right into your presentation, which this committee is anxious to hear.
Thank you. Again, my name is Jeff Marshall. I've been working in historic preservation work in Bucks County since the bicentennial. I am on staff at Heritage Conservancies for over 40 years. Last 10 years, I was president of the organization. I am now a senior advisor working on a limited basis. I've also been on the board of directors of Preservation Pennsylvania, National Barn Alliance, the Historic Barn and Farm Foundation, Pennsylvania Land Trust Association, of which the last three organizations I was a past president. So I've been doing this kind of work for a long time, and I am not an academic per se, although I've written books on it. I feel getting people engaged in what we do and showing our relevance in terms of conservation and preservation is the best way for us to move forward. So that's my introduction. And the background, in all truth, I do own an old house and barn in Newtown, Bucks County. So I both practical and pragmatic, as well as being, academic about old buildings. So I don't know if you want, Dennis, you want to just do the slideshow, or do you want to try to make me co-host and try to do it myself? I don't care. I'll be willing to let you do it.
No, I tell you what, I have Jeffrey's presentation. I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and we can take it from there. And if I can. My apologies. Let's see. I did this earlier with great success. For some reason, struggling now.
I don't know if I can share it without being a co-host. Let's see.
You-
Hold on.
If you can,
Yes,
please do.
good.
You got it?
Got it.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
I didn't want to usurp my role here. Okay.
No, go for it.
All right. Basically, what Des asked me to talk about is understanding, prioritizing, preservation. As I said, not only am I a preservation advocate, but as the president of Heritage Conservancy, I was responsible for how does one administer, interpret, and pay for a lot of historic structures. So it's not all academic. So I'm going to start with a general overview of, preservation efforts. And forgive me for a lot of the words here. I'm just going to skip through the highlighted parts. Why do we do it? Why should you as a community care about it? And basically, we want to protect and preserve our historic architectural and character of the community. That's what makes a community important. More and more, we're seeing that these old buildings represent a skill of craftsmanship or workmanship that no longer exists, that it's worth its own merit for the actual artisans that put together historic structures. And we also always talk about the character and charm historic buildings add to a community, particularly in communities that are getting homogenized everywhere you go. It gives us a little distinction. Historic sites can also be scenes of creative reuse that really are attractive and can bring an 18th or 19th century structure into the 21st century. And finally, they can be good investments. They can be good investments for a private property owner to take advantage of tax benefits, tax credits. They can be good for a community because they also spur investment. People often want to come to a venue that is housed in a historic structure, even if that's not the purpose of their visit. So those are some of the reasons, as it says in here, as going to a restaurant in an old tavern or a restaurant in an old grist mill, or going to an event in an old building adds a little bit of fun to whatever you're doing otherwise. Basically, taking a 100,000 foot look at it, we shouldn't destroy an old house or barn. And the analogy I make here is if you borrowed some antique from a friend of yours for a few days, would you destroy it when you're done with it rather than give it back? Certainly you wouldn't. An old house is like an heirloom. You may be the quote owner of the building and get to enjoy it for weeks, months, years, or decades, but you're really borrowing it from past owners and from future potential owners. And it will be here in for generations to come. And so it's important that we recognize that fact. However, how does one go about this? And I've listed a number of factors, and this is certainly not all of them, that I look at as again, preservation professional in trying to determine whether to acquire a building, or in the case of Heritage Conservancy, continue to own a building. We, in fact, de-acquisitioned a couple of structures during my tenure. So here's what we look at, and you can read them for yourself, and if not, I'll go through them quickly. Is it something special? That's the key. Does it have community significance? And that we have to come back to. What's its possible future? What can it be used for? What's its current use? Is it adaptable? What's its state of repair? And with that comes, not only is there any there, does it still represent its period of significance? And the term we use is integrity in the preservation world. Does it still have integrity? And related to its state of repair is what is the cost of preservation versus the cost of restoration? And as Dennis and I talked about over the phone, like I said, a week or two ago, there's a difference between rehabilitation, restoration, and renovation. They are all different aspects of bringing a building to usefulness. Restoration is making it look the way it was. And that's something people almost always gravitate towards as the goal, which may not be the best goal for every historic property. What are the wishes of the community? Is there support for the effort? And then lastly, whether it's owned by a municipality or not, there are zoning regulations and other regulations that limit the use for occupancy, for alterations, for setbacks, for parking, for all the things that may be important to really adaptively reuse a structure. So I get I give a lot of talks about preservation protection, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that right now. As it states here in big bold letters, in general, there is no protection for historic buildings uniformly. There are no overall real regulations on protecting historic buildings. And in virtually every municipality, any owner of a building can demolish it just as the owner of any building can. And the overriding thought process throughout Pennsylvania in particular, but the United States in general, is that the protection of private property rights is be more important than the community heritage or protecting historic buildings. So that's the reality. Now we'll come to some specifics, some exceptions, but that's the basic reality of preservation. There's no universal protector of historic buildings. And just to echo that point, in the last couple of weeks, I've had 3 instances where buildings have been destroyed, or in fact are scheduled to be demolished in Bucks County. Many people in America think that we are like the United Kingdom, where there is a list they're called listed buildings, which the law says a listed building may not be demolished, extended, or altered without special permission from the local planning authority, which typically consults, as it says, irrelevant governmental bodies. That's not the case in the United States. We do have the National Register of Historic Places, but the National Register of Historic Places offers no protection, and I use the term protection. Some people use the term control, but I will use the term protection for this group. The National Register list confers no protection to historic property, except that it requires anyone seeking a federal license, authorization, or permit to consider the adverse impact on a historic building by their project. And we see that with power lines, pipelines, road widenings, and a number of other federal projects. The state of Pennsylvania, through the Pennsylvania History Code, mirrors that. And if a property is on the National Register, every effort is made to mitigate the adverse impact on any project. That does not mean you can't demolish it. It means you may have to go through some mitigating factors. In Pennsylvania, we do have one law that allows municipalities to establish locally zoned historic districts. And these locally zoned historic districts are designed to protect the character of the district. And so therefore they regulate, construction, alteration, demolition of buildings, and only exterior of buildings visible from a public way or a thoroughfare. So that is a Pennsylvania Act 1227 that creates historic zoning districts. Edgewood Village, I believe, has one. Doylestown has one. Newtown, most big towns in Bucks County have one. And on the bottom of the screen, you see a link to We Conserve PA. Although it's a conservation organization, it has a definitive webpage called Conservation Tools, in which it goes through all the legal ramifications, all the regulations revolving around historic preservation as far as conservation. And I was a former president of the organization, so I recommend that website to you to take a look if you want some real deep background beyond the 20 minutes I'm giving you. The other thing I'd like to discuss briefly are common preservation myths. And when I deal with historic preservation here in Bucks County, I find people don't know a lot about the rules and regulations and say a lot of things that are not true. And that's based on one of two things. One is inaccurate information, which is self-explanatory, but the other is unrealistic expectations. They believe that if you're on the historic register, money's going to fall out of the sky to help you preserve it. And someone will be there to be in your corner to fight for its preservation. So the unrealistic expectations are often as problematic as inaccurate information. So here we go through a couple of the most common ones. as I said, people believe it's a designated historic landmark or on the National Register. No, it doesn't. It doesn't prohibit demolition outright. Many municipalities have under the MPC delay of demolition ordinances and other things to help offset the immediate impact of a demolition, but very few municipalities use the National Register or any other method for protecting historic structures. The other myth is that if you have a historic property, people won't be able to change it. Well, that's not true either. Anyone can make any alteration to a historic structure, with the exception of the locally zoned historic district's exterior. So being designated on the National Register or any other register has no impact on the property owner. And as I said earlier, if you own a historic structure on the National Register, you can demolish it. You may not be able to use federal funds for the project, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. There is a body of regulations put out by the National Park Service on the appropriate ways to rehabilitate historic structures. And there's several sets of rules. One's standard for rehabilitation, and there are other ones for restoration and other variations on preservation. But no, there is no one who's going to tell you you can't do anything to your building, and no, you don't have to have it open for public tours if it's a private residence, or even a building leased to a profit-making organization or any organization for that fact. The other myth that we talk about a lot for here is that there's foundation grants or large government grants available, and the answer is there are not. In Bucks County, the Grundy Foundation traditionally has given money in the past for bricks and mortar. The Pennsylvania Historic Museum Commission has an ongoing grant program that makes money available. The Bucks County Foundation, which is headquartered in Doylestown, has some small grants available. Most of the grants for historic preservation are for programs, not for bricks and mortar. The other aspect of historic funding are tax incentives, but those are limited to income-producing properties listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And in order to get those tax credits, you have to go through an approved preservation program where you have to submit all your proposed alterations in advance, and they all get approved prior to you getting your tax credits. I also get asked, well, what about the Bucks County Historical Society? They're out there to help. And I am a member of that organization. I'll be there tomorrow in the library. But that historic preservation is not their purpose. They are a library and a collection of artifacts. And this sounds a little harsh, but it is in fact the case. It's more their mission to accept a date stone from a house that's being demolished than to advocate for that building's preservation. That's just not their mission. There are several historic preservation organizations in the county. Heritage Conservancy is one, and probably the only county-wide organization that is focusing on trying to protect natural and historic resources. Many townships have township historic commissions, as Lower Makefield does, that are advisory boards appointed by the local municipalities that make recommendations to the boards of supervisors or borough council, whichever is appropriate. As I said earlier, the municipality's planning code allows municipalities to put a lot more roadblocks up for the demolition of historic structures, but most municipalities don't do it because they do not feel that their community wants such strict controls over their private properties. So that leads into what are the constraints in historic preservation or protection? It's not easy. Even if there was desire, to do so, who and how is determination made if a building is historic? When I speak about old buildings, I try to differentiate between two terms. One is being historic, and the other is being historical. So historic building is something important in history, and historical means it is, old and is, has history. But the criteria for determining which is which is not clear because almost every building is individual, and even the National Register of Historic Places, which sets down guidelines, are very ambiguous and really hard to interpret. The growing issue is the fact that it can be very expensive to maintain a historic building. And nowadays, it's getting harder and harder to find competent craftspeople and other experts who will give advice as what to do and how to do it. As I said, there's nothing. Heritage Conservancy can't tell a property owner not to demolish their property. There's no authority for any private individual to tell another individual or nonprofit to tell another individual what they can or can't do. That townships do, in fact, regulate demolition of buildings as part of their general zoning, and Kurt and others can talk about that more at length. But that's generally not based on any historic criteria. Lower Makefield did an inventory of historic resources many years ago. In fact, they've done several. Other communities have used those surveys as impetus to designate buildings as being high priority, average priority, or no priority. And those buildings that are determined to have a high priority for preservation are both given protections in the sense of not allowing them to be demolished immediately, and often get zoning benefits in terms of dimensions or uses that are not allowed for a typical house. Doylestown Township has been the leader in that. And for example, some of the large buildings such as Aldi Mansion, which is the Heritage Conservancy's offices, is in a zoned residential area. And we have gotten dispensation and special use allowances because it's on the National Register or eligible for the National Register. Doylestown also allows for cluster provisions where they're not normally allowed if a developer will leave some elbow room around a historic building and give it some context. So there are some ways to do it. The hard part, and a little more esoteric, is it's very hard to categorize buildings. If you use the National Register, they're either eligible or they're not. There's no sliding scale, no gray area, something being more important than one, but not as important as the other. It's very hard to make a qualitative analysis when you do a number of projects. We worked for Lower Makefield back in 2007 to do analysis of all their historic resources, which then included Patterson Farm, the Dalgowitz, and Elm Lounge, and the Farringer House. So we, in fact, said from an outsider's point of view, looking at their history and their architectural significance, we prioritize them. But it's very difficult. And as this leads up to, it's very difficult to come up with rules and regulations that differentiates the difference between something that adds to the tapestry of a community, such a a vernacular house or barn, versus a spectacular landmark type of building. As I said several times now, the key impediment to preservation efforts for those who want to see preservation efforts are the great group of people who don't want to see preservation efforts because they feel that this is an infringement on their personal rights. And this is based on the Constitution, the Takings Clause, which says private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. Many people think that designating something as historic does not allow them to use the property for its highest and best use, and therefore that is a taking. So that argument has been made countless times. It has been defeated every time, and it made it to the Supreme Court in the famous case of the Penn Central in 1978 that allows municipalities to designate individual resources or collections of buildings as being historic. So why is this happening? Couple reasons. Bucks County has changed rapidly. In the almost 50 years I've been doing this, Lower Makefield, Upper Makefield, Newtown, Northampton, which were once rural, are almost all suburbanized. that has a couple issues. One is that the population are more and more not native, and they're not from the community. So there's less connection to the local history. It's not where they grew up. It is where they live now, and they might admire it and maybe even want to learn about it, but it's not at their core. And then the other part is, of course, with the rapid suburbanization comes increase in real estate values. And I think that is the biggest challenge we face, is that many historic buildings are sitting on properties that are too valuable for the property owner to want to preserve them. That's not necessarily the case with the municipality, but economic issues are still important. So in vast majority of cases, houses, barns, and other outbuildings are not listed or protected, and they can be bought and torn down virtually with the application of a demolition permit. And really, the crux of it is it's a challenge when a property value is so much greater than the value of the house. In the past, there have been times where old houses, to restore them would cost so much money that the surrounding houses were not valuable enough to have an incentive for a property owner to spend that money. Now we're seeing almost the opposite. Now we're seeing, in the age of, I won't call them McMansions because they're mansions, in the age of huge houses, a nice old small house is too small for people to renovate and make it into the type of house that fits into that economic stratus that it has to fit in the middle of a subdivision. So those are some of the issues. So what's the path forward? I think the key is to understand and promote relevance of our historic buildings to the greater community, and recognize that you can't stand alone. You can't be seen as being in the way of affordable housing, economic or social equity, economic development, and even now more important, climate change. But you have to say why a building is important and why it should be important to a community. And that's one of the key things that anyone who owns a historic building needs to do. The other thing is we have to start to consider some reasonableness. Many historic preservationists take an uncompromising approach where they'll agonize over the width of buttons on the window when, that's just the tiniest little detail that really isn't important. And what this does is make most preservationists seem unreasonable and out of touch. And I think all of us have heard some reference to the local historical society that wants to see something preserved rather than historical society. And in this day and age, recognize that economic sustainability is impacted by a purist approach, and you may have to compromise. The key is determining what are character-defining elements with a historic building and not worry so much about the other items and just focus on those. And lastly, engage others. You'll always have a core of people who love old buildings, but that's not enough to really make these projects successful. Education is a key. Again and again, telling people why a building is important to the community, why a person who lives in a residential subdivision 4 miles away from a historic barn should care about that barn or old house. If they don't care, they're not going to be supportive, and they're not going to vote to either spend money through bond issues or other programs, and they're certainly not going to vote to install regulations that would impose on their personal freedom. So I've been doing this a long time, and I've come up with this little checklist that if you do have a historic site, there are some warning signs to look at and to look for. And if most of the people involved in your organization, be it local Friends of group or the township or whoever the owner is, if just keeping the doors open is the goal, then you're doomed for failure. If only a few people understand the mission of the historic site, what are the goals? Why is it being preserved? You're in trouble. If you don't have money put away to make necessary repairs and invest in long-term capital budget, you're in trouble. And one of the ways we've seen in the nonprofit world, but there's no reason why it can't be, used for a friends of group for a municipal owned property, is establish a plant giving program. The people who have supported it, the history and the preservation of the building through their lifetime are important in preserving it, after they're gone. And there's some other things here. If the visitation is declined, if you don't have school groups visiting your property, that means you're not engaging the younger generation. That means the schools don't think it's important to talk about local history and how your buildings look at it. And if there's very little interpretation of the facts or stories about the house's history that are available for people to look at and read, whether signs or text, that's a warning sign that you're not engaging enough people. Part of the more technical things is there's no historic structures report for a property that outline what the issues are, what's original, what's not original, where the maintenance dollars should be spent, what priorities there are for preservation and what should be addressed first. And the outgrowth of that is there's no little or regular maintenance of the buildings or grounds because there's just not enough budget or not enough interest in allocation of funds for that purpose. If there is no proactive planning, looking ahead on capital improvements, that the roof will need a replacement in X amount of years, and you'll need, a new floor system, you'll need new HVAC, and the only thing you do are emergency repairs when there's a hole in the roof or something similar. If there's no signage off the property telling people how to get there, or once you're there, telling people why they're there, and that's, the two last items. So I'm going to go into one last major aspect and try to wind this up. I apologize for going on. I think for many people and for many years, the terms historic preservation and house museum have become synonymous. In today's day and age, that's no longer the case. To have a good house museum, you have to have something that attracts people, where people can go there and have the ability to see the world or the community as it was when the house was built. That's what visitors want to do in a historic building. They want to feel what it really was like. And it's very difficult to do. Virtually every organization that starts out and says, let's save this old house, thinks that it'll be a house museum. If you build it, they will come, which is far from the truth. I believe there's a recent study was done, or at least 2018, that less than 10% of house museums across the United States make enough money through their admission to pay for their ongoing costs. It is highly unlikely that will ever occur. Not only has that model stopped working, it never really worked, with the exception of perhaps Mount Vernon and some Frank Lloyd Wright buildings. That doesn't happen in the real world. You need to have a diversified funding stream in order to keep your costs, or you need a municipality to keep throwing money at it year after year after year after year, which becomes old quickly, forgive the pun. And there are probably too many house museums. There are thousands across the United States. I think you can find, 20 within an hour's drive of Lower Makefield, and most of them are struggling. Historic Falls Museum's got a great collection, and they're struggling with their 6 or 8 buildings. Newtown Historic Association's got them. They're all over. New Hope Historical Society, Doylestown. Again, there are dozens and dozens of house museums out there. And again, as I said, almost every community has some type of house museum. And in today's day and age, someone had told me this quote, that they don't go to house museums because they're the homes of dead rich white guys, which means you're not capturing a broad enough spectrum of the community that we are today. And that's the key. We are not, like Philadelphia, where they have a very big problem with, diversity inclusion and trying to get people to look at the historic buildings. We're not there, but that's the future here in Bucks County as well. And we really need to explain to people again, what's the relevance to the day-to-day lives of your community residents? As I said, they cost a lot to maintain. When you go to the length of having a house museum, your collection becomes at odds with the building. The worst place for historic artifacts is a historic building without, temperature control and security and all the things. So the very things that would attract people to a house museum make it, are difficult to have in a house museum. And so if you're lucky enough to have a lot of visitors, then you have to worry about wear and tear. If you have a lot of visitors, you need staff. And it is an enormous and never-ending drain on the finances of any organization. And there's often an ongoing tension between those who really want to adhere to museum quality standards and keeping properties pure, keeping it as a farm or a house museum, and realizing that that just is very difficult. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's very difficult. And as I said, with all these house museums, keeping your head above water is the goal for many house museums. And now we see more and more buildings and sites making themselves available for special events such as weddings and banquets. And those come with their own issues when buildings aren't zoned for that, where license and inspections, have to be done. They don't meet the standards for buildings for assembly use. And so you're forced, no matter what you do, you're forced to keep the roof on the building. And when push comes to shove and you have to do that, or you want to expand your programs almost always suffer. And you're then in that downward cycle I mentioned a little bit earlier, where you have no outreach and nobody coming to the site. And it becomes the question, who are we saving this for? So is there a better way? And again, a Heritage Conservancy, and I said earlier, on the Board of Preservation Pennsylvania for a while, and other nonprofit preservation organizations. Sometimes selling a property is the way to ensure that it will be maintained, that the private owner will invest in the property because it is their investment. Of course, that would be, I would never recommend that once a building is in public hands, turn it back to the private hands without having a preservation easement that prohibits its demolition or major alteration. In some cases, I might even request that a building be open to the public on an annual or semi-annual basis. There has been for years the presumption that the nonprofit management of a historic house is somehow superior and therefore preferable to private stewardship. I can show you dozens of examples where that is the case and dozens of examples where that's not the case. What really matters is finding, some way to address the long-term interests of the property. Sometimes it's mixed use. Sometimes if you want to have a house museum, you have a single room that's interpreted and the rest of the building is used for some other flexible use or community use. I've been involved with some houses that allow you to spend a couple $100 to spend the night in a historic house, and they raise, $300 or $400 in a weekend when the building isn't being used for anything else. Again, there's staffing involved in that. Heritage Conservancy is looking at that option for one of its historic properties right now. How about government use? Not just to be as a house museum, but use it for other meeting space or for other organizations. Different aspects. If you're not convinced that complete centralization of all the good services provided by your municipality is your goal, perhaps using it as office space to help justify the expenses, but keeping the exterior looking the way it did so the average person can appreciate that. So, it's often finding a middle ground that we as public historians and preservationists, really are involved in interpretation and documentation and why they're important. But we really need to engage diverse audiences and even, God forbid, offer a chance for people to have fun at a historic house and do something besides standing behind the old-fashioned velvet ropes and pointing at dusty artifacts. All right. So again, we're coming to the big finish here, folks. Key to me is a building must be sustainable. Not demolishing a building at the time it's threatened isn't preservation. It's a delay in demolition. So you need to be sustainable. And here's again a couple of things I've learned over the years. To be sustainable, you serve your audience, and it's valued by the community. People care about it, know about it, and appreciate it. You tell stories that are inspiring. Stories of the Underground Railroad are becoming very popular. Women's suffrage, the role of the women in, the daily rural life, the role of the revolution here in Bucks County. There's a lot of inspiring stories that can go with the historic house. Again, connecting to groups and individuals outside the organization to get them engaged. So it's not just the same people who are always at the table, but other people in the community appreciate what you have. Again, part of sustainability has to do with the leadership. Who are the stakeholders? I find it admirable that you all have volunteered this ad hoc committee from diverse backgrounds. As leaders, as people who run a historic site, you have to embrace the culture of learning, inquiry, and change. Yet, maintain a standard of excellence and maintaining the integrity of a historic site. And you have to be proactive and, manage your organization and look for opportunities and not turn your nose up by saying that's never worked before or that would never work here. I have to really, use the jargon, think outside the proverbial box. So the goal for all of us, and why do we do this, is we want to keep special places special. And historic preservation is more successful when it's part of the social fabric of the community. When people understand that it is their heritage and it makes a difference to their community, that your community isn't exactly like the community 5 miles up the road or 5 miles down the road. And whether it's in a downtown or a rural area or even a little village, it helps maintain the vitality of a community by having some diversity and really looking back to heritage. So if you have any questions, I am available by phone or by email. And with that, I will stop this presentation.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
That was excellent. And I think you had a lot of messages in there that this ad hoc committee needs to take at heart and to begin to digest and internalize. Questions, issues, reactions from the committee, please.
I can ask a quick question. Jeffrey, have you seen any of these buildings?
Yes, I was involved in 2007 when the township hired Heritage Conservancy to do the evaluation of let's say, Patterson, the golf course, the Barrington House, and Elm Lounge. So I've been to the Satterthwaite House. I've been to the Patterson House on a number of occasions. I've had interactions with the friends of groups, positive and negative. And so, yes, I've been to virtually all of them. I've been in the Patterson House for an art event within the last year or two, but that's the latest one.
Question, Jeffrey, with respect to barns. I know we talk a lot about houses. These classic old Pennsylvania bank barns, of which Lower Makefield has 2. What successes that you've seen, uses that you've seen that have worked for those classic old buildings with a stone foundation and large, high second-story mounds?
Yes.
What comes to mind?
The right now, wedding venues seem to be the buzz for all these things, or event venues. But again, in a building that isn't fire rated, it doesn't have suppression, it doesn't have 2 or 3 egress. It's a very touchy issue. The key, as with any restoration, renovation. And just so in full disclosure, I've been asked by the Crickets Preserve Group to help them with their analysis and their mitigation efforts through the Pennsylvania Historic Museum Commission, and perhaps even Lower Makefield Township, if and when that time comes. And part of the conversation we had about that barn, just because it's fresh in my mind, is how do you keep the character of the barn and make it economically viable? And many bank barns are just too large for residences, so they need some sort of adaptive reuse. La Stalla is the one that comes to mind, and the store here in Village at Newtown. In many cases, and when I bought my property here in Newtown, it was on 1.5 acres, and the zoning would not let me do anything with the barn, yet the comprehensive plan and the supervisors and planning commission told Mr. DeLuca, which is how I first met him 20 years ago, that he had to preserve the barn, so he found somebody stupid enough to buy it and take on that burden from him. But as I looked at it, and that's how I got involved with barns, coming up with a use that is sustainable, which means attracts business, is often diametrically opposed to having a barn in a residential neighborhood where the neighbors don't want lights, they don't want activity, they don't want traffic. And that's where it comes down to the municipality saying, you know, we understand that, but this is important to our community, and that is something we would, you know, look at carefully so that it doesn't become a nuisance, but it gives it economic sustainability. Most barns are too big to go to the residences. The volumes are so great, the heat, the air conditioning, you end up boxing it off and hiding the very character of the barn. So barns are particularly challenging. And that's why I helped form something called the Historic Barn and Firearm Foundation of Pennsylvania. And that's something we try to get a tax program for barn owners in 2008 when the Great Depression hit. So that didn't work, but we are now working with the state, and we're going to have a barn grant program that actually comes out of mitigation funds from developers who demolish other historic barns. So that barns are special to me because, you know, they are so fragile because you don't need them. You don't need them if you're on 10 acres or 2 acres. You don't need them in modern farming because they're too small to put combines in. They're too weak to put round bales in. You really have to want to preserve a barn, and that needs to be incentivized for the average person to take on that person.
For committee members, just in case you all are probably aware, but if you didn't know the term, the Prickett Preserve Project that Mr. Marshall referenced was the project that was recently approved by the township for the building of the Wegmans site. And part of that project approval included the two buildings on the site that I will say generally, Jeff, I'm going to make you cringe here. And I've worked with Jeff.
Go ahead.
Jeff in Newtown, so he always has to correct me. The two historical properties, including the barn on that site, that they have committed to retain, invest in, and make a, you know, make them being, I'm trying to come up with the right word here, to be a feature on the property. And I think they're relying on Jeff for some insights on how they can do that most effectively in honoring the tradition of those two structures.
Other questions, reactions, patients from the committee?
Jeff, may I ask you a question? Would you have an issue with the township putting up your PowerPoint presentation under the committee's umbrella as far as the details from this meeting? Are you?
I would not. I might want to spend the day to go back and make sure that things I may have lifted from the, like the National Trust website are duly you know, referenced, but not at all. If you give me a you know an hour or two to just go back over just to make sure that we don't infringe on anybody else's rights.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. I know I would like to refer to it in the future as well.
The chances are no one will care, but let me just take a quick swing at it, and I might just let it go as is anyway.
Okay.
And along those lines, Kurt, if I may tell the committee that the township has agreed to pay the conservancy for the time that I spent preparing this and for tonight. And if there are any questions in the future, to be made available for the committee's benefit if they so decide.
Thank you.
Thank Kurt. And the township.
It's very helpful. It's very helpful. All right. Well, thank you, Jeffrey. At this point, I'd ask John if there's any questions or comments from the public. Any public comments at this juncture?
No public comment.
Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Stedman, if I may as well, if subsequent to this presentation and in reviewing, let's say, the next set of meeting minutes and Mr. Marshall's PowerPoint, committee members have subsequent questions that they come up with, I'm happy, as part of the arrangement Mr. Marshall just discussed, to forward him questions via email, what have you, for things to ask him to ponder on if the committee has follow-up questions after today.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Kurt. Good to know. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. You're welcome to stay on for the rest of the meeting as a member of the public. That's totally your discretion. I don't want to occupy your evening any more than we have, but you're more than welcome.
Thank you.
Next item, I just wanted to comment to the board. We received an invitation from the Patterson Farm Preservation, Inc. Organization, an invitation to potentially meet with them and tour the properties. Of course, we have toured the properties, and I've had some email exchanges, and I've invited them to present it at a public forum at a future meeting like this, if they so desire. And we don't have a definitive response on that, but to the extent that that organization has information, historical significance information, some of the things that Jeffrey was referring to, the stories that make the property relevant to the community, we're all ears and want to learn and benefit from in anything that they may have to offer. So we stand ready for that. I would like to ask, we formed 2 subcommittees at our last meeting. And so I'd like to ask those 2 subcommittee chairs now to perhaps make some comments or reports on their thinking and some next steps as they pursue those areas. One is the historical significance, the community significance of the organization. James is the chair of that. James, anything you'd like to report on at this juncture?
Yes. So the one thing I wanted to propose to our committee is bringing some of the members of the Historic Commission to talk about 2 things. One being some of the grants that are available to us. I sent Dennis a PowerPoint that was presented by one of the members at our last meeting about Keystone Grants. And it's a really great overview. Dennis, if you want to share that with everyone, or I can send it out.
Yeah, why don't you send it out? I'm not adding any of
Sure.
it. I just saw it and didn't have a chance to get through it, but go ahead, send that to the committee if you will.
Yeah, I can send it to everyone. And the person who made that offered to talk to our committee about that same presentation, or answer any questions about grants that he's able to. And I think it would be a good idea to have Helen Hines, who's the chair of the Historic Commission, come and talk about what she knows about the buildings themselves and their historic significance, as well as she's well aware of the township's history with applying for these grants and the township's history of taking care of these properties. So I think she could be a valuable resource to us for learning how we might want to proceed. The only thing with these grants is that we really ought to start thinking about them within the next month, I'd say, if we want to start coordinating a grant application. And that could be for preserving these properties, if we figure out that that's what we want to do, and put that money toward ensuring that they're not crumbling, or that to stop any damage, just to use the money for that. But I think it'd be a good idea to hear about these grants pretty soon.
Okay.
James, is there a time frame on those grants? I mean, is it by the end of the year or something like that?
Yeah, let me go through and see when the
If you wouldn't
Yeah.
mind, while he's doing that, Dennis, my next speaker that I'm going to bring in a series of speakers for our next meeting to talk about grants. We can, obviously with what James is requesting, it can be however you all want to do it. Some of these grants that we're looking at require matching monies, which could be consequential or inconsequential based upon the timing of based upon or how we are prioritizing some of those repairs. Some of them you can get a grant for 1 year and then you have to delay until you do it again. So you want to make the request to be substantial enough to make a difference. So James, first off, I agree with you. I would say, with some of the timings of some of the grants that are coming up, like at the end of October and mid-November, with where the committee is, that may be a push to have something substantial developed by then. But there are a variety of opportunities beyond even the ones you're talking about, James, that have rolling time frames and things that could go on. And certainly if we want to have someone come and speak, and you have someone in mind that's going to talk about a particular grant, I can take that information and have someone else who might be able to talk about other grants, so we can sort of have several possibilities to look at with criteria, timing, match required, what have you. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, this is specifically about the Keystone Grant, and in the PowerPoint it says it's due normally at March 1st of the grant year, and getting the ball rolling on what exactly we'd want, and how we're going to pitch our proposal. They do require a 50-50 cash match as well, so that's just another thing to think about. But again, I think I'm not the person to present this. I think it would be better to have Joe who made the PowerPoint, come and talk about these grants specifically.
And I think certainly the committee needs to hear much more and learn much more about the grant process. We have a lot of carpentry to do here on these buildings, and the carpenter's adage of measure twice and cut once certainly comes to mind. And so I think we want to do our homework. Let's understand where we're going, what our story is, what our plan is, and put a good foot forward on any grant application, so that we, like I say, measure twice and cut once. So I'm not interested in rushing into any applications. I am interested in rushing towards understanding that process, so that when we're ready, we can be highly effective at it. I think that's the point. So Kurt, maybe if you, James, and I want to work on kind of coordinating some of the sources of information we have on the grants, and I can talk to Helen in advance, and we can kind of coordinate how we're going to do this to make the best use of the resources we have available, and the best use of the committee's time.
So, but Dennis, if you mind, if I have one more thing. So, it's not, the township's financial position has improved. As an example, we do have a Patterson Farm Fund that we collect various rents and things on, that we have not millions of dollars, but about $100,000 in that fund that we can utilize towards especially immediate improvements that may help may help with something that's deteriorating that we need to deal with immediately. We're doing that. You all had provided to the board and to me the listing, for example, of the golf house, Dennis, if you recall, that you had sent. So we have that property being looked at. We have the cleanup that you looked at. So there are things that we do in the interim, James, as well, that even if they are 10 and 15 and 20, $25,000 items, that we have the capability of, especially if they are in imminent need, to be able to work on some of those things as well in the meantime. So, but we can do that, Dennis. We can sit and coordinate like who I have, what kind of grants they want to talk about to make sure we don't have anybody doing redundant work to give an efficient review to the committee.
Okay.
Kurt, I believe I was told, at least on the last supervisors meeting, when Fred presented our proposal, that you chimed in and said things would be handled administratively. Is that the foundation stabilization issues as well?
You mean with the woodchucks?
The woodchucks.
That's what I call them, woodchucks. Dennis is from a part of the country that I am, that I think we call them woodchucks and not groundhogs. So
We call them groundhogs. Go ahead. Doesn't matter. Same critter.
So same critter. Yes, that's a discussion that's ongoing as well about ramping up that program for that control and potential and reviewing the stabilization that may be needed with the damage that that they may have already caused by all of the digging under the foundation.
Okay, so you administratively have not come to an idea as to how to stabilize those foundations yet?
I have not. No, I haven't
Okay.
yet. So we have, I have our engineering firm and staff looking at all three of those issues simultaneously. For example, I'm not trying to change the topic, but like regarding the Slack House, we have contractors that are going out to that site to give us costs with that particular issue, as well as the lower level windows that have some issues with them on the site out. Again, I'll call it woodchuck control. I have our engineers and staff as well, looking to have some people take a look at that to see what their assessment would be as far as what is a meaningful stabilization, and even if we have to spend more than a few dollars to do that. So my hope is at the next meeting for you all that I'll have a more specific update on all these things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt.
Yes,
We'll put that on the agenda. Yes, Fred.
just a quick question for Kurt. Since you mentioned that the funds from the leases at Patterson in particular can be used for purposes of improvements or repairs, is that correct?
Yep.
So those lease funds, those rental funds then are earmarked specifically just for Patterson Farm properties?
So we have a fund in the budget that's essentially called that. So I suppose they could be for something else, but I would argue that the intention of the collection of those funds would be to reinvest back into those properties, specific to that collection, not just specifically for the tenants, but in that property as a whole. I'd have to look if there was any enabling resolutions or something dictating that, but that would be my understanding for the limits or the property limit for where that money would be used.
Thank you. James, anything else from your side?
Nope. I guess I'll just work with you and Kurt this week to see when we want to get people out to these meetings, right?
Yeah. Yep. Let's do that. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, James. Good job.
Thank you.
Our other subcommittee is new uses for the buildings. Beth, anything to report?
Yes, as the committee knows, we have a fact sheet document that we've been trying to get our hands around, and I added a spreadsheet page in there about what other farms in the area are doing in order to be sustainable. And all of them have some sort of commercial venture, you know, with hay rides or Christmas things, or, you know, a farm market or a CSA or music venue or whatever. And you can reach out, you know, throughout the county and into Jersey with the Living History Museum about that. So you can look at that. It's there, but they've all got some sort of commercial venture, you know, which, as Jeffrey said, you know, you need to figure out how do you sustain these buildings, and what happens. I was amused when Jeffrey said that he was looking at, you know, that wedding venues for barns was something, because I actually did go in and do a Google search for wedding venues in barns in Bucks County. And the nearest one is Rose Bank Winery in Newtown on 413. And most of them are further away. So if you wanted to do that, you'd have to go pretty far in order to find a barn that would take a wedding.
But if I could make a point consistent with something that Jeff said, and I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Dave.
go ahead.
So that property, what's interesting is you start talking about the local considerations for that.
Yeah.
When that venue was approved, one of the things the township always struggles with there is, because of where the location, if you all know where that is right on 413, 2-lane road. So the township had to enact certain restrictions to say that those venues couldn't have any more than 200 people in them, even though the barn could accommodate a lot more. And that even to have an event there, that whoever the wedding party would have to hire the Newtown Police Department off duty to control traffic when they came in, to prevent people from lining up along 413. So even in that site, and it's gone very well, has had to have certain local restrictions put on there to be concerned about traffic, noise in the area, what have you. So
Right.
It's gone over very well there.
Right. I know we frequently get requests to the Art Center to come onto our property, which we refer to the township, for various photography opportunities, whether it's family photos or proms or weddings or whatever. I got one today. I want to propose to my fiance, and I want to have, you know, candles and fireworks. And I was like, I'm referring that to you, Kurt. I'm not dealing with it, but but those are the kinds of things people love it as a backdrop. It's beautiful. It's very photogenic with the corn and the barns and the sunsets. It's all very lovely, but that's, you know, you don't rent that out as that, and it's not sustainable. So I started putting in our worksheet. I got an echo. I started putting in the worksheet for the barn and for some of the other properties, some ideas about, you know, everything from performing arts centers to whatever, meeting spaces. And these were ideas I gleaned many of them from the 2007 report from the Heritage Conservancy, you know, just kind of expanding on them, at least for the Patterson barn. I think I'll let you all know, I let Dennis know that the AOI Board of Directors put in a formal letter to the township supervisors expressing their interest in potentially leasing or using the pack house and expanding our education facilities in that regard. So I'll let you all know, now the public knows. There are several potential uses. You know, as I talk to craftspeople, there are interests in studio rentals, all of which would require, you know, utilities, 4-season temperature, climate control kind of stuff, and you know, renovation, which, you know, you don't know who's going to do that. I'm not quite sure. I haven't figured that part out, but those are possible ideas that I've just kind of heard about and have started to put away and onto the sheets for consideration, and we'll keep building them. As you all come up with ideas, please, you know, chime in and add to that list.
Okay. Thank you, Bet. And the pack house there on Patterson, just to be clear, the utilities do not work there. I mean, the heat and water Is there heat and water there now? I
There is
know
electric. There is no heat.
There's
There's no
heat.
heat. That old boiler is
Yeah, right,
kaput, and I presume the HVAC is done too. So,
right.
yeah, that's a situation where, you know, if the
Okay.
committee wanted to pursue that as a, you know, a separate
Right.
thing, you could.
Okay. And plumbing?
Oh, Betty, there is heat and facilities there, that just the units that produce it need to be replaced. Is that what we're saying?
Well, I don't know. I'd leave it to Kurt to tell me whether those things still work or not.
I mean, I guess that's different,
There's
right? Like,
there's
it's all
there's
run-
electric. There's electric because there's an alarm and there are lights. I was told that the well and the septic were truncated, but I'm not sure what the status is there.
I didn't know if there was heat. It's just, you know, whatever unit was producing the heat no longer works, or if the whole thing needs to be piped for, or you know, ducts for heat.
I think in my opinion, it needs to be replaced. It's very old, but Kurt is nodding, so I'll go with that. So.
Yeah, a modern heat pump, but some of these efficient units could cover that whole space probably pretty well.
Pretty well.
But okay, but that proposal's in. We appreciate your keeping us abreast of that. Thank you. And you're a quality tenant now in the house and using some of those facilities. So hopefully, you know, that can work out if you have the demand for that kind of space. That's terrific. It makes sense, and I think Kennedy said before that that's an example of an old building, not a historic building, quite frankly. So old cinder block. Okay. Anything else, Bet? Is that complete?
No, I had on my list of things. Kurt covered the proposal from the last meeting. I remind everybody to fill out the fact sheet assignments that we agreed to last time, and the pack house information. I wanted to disclose that. And where are we on our next meeting, and were we going to have a working session?
Kurt and I talked about the working session. That's really, well, let's get to that. We'll get to that when we get to the future meetings.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, just park that for one moment. Any other business at this juncture? Any other business that the committee member or the township wants to raise? Okay, hearing none. Again, John, I'd ask, is there any public comment?
No public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, Bet is our secretary. You're starting to tickle down the action items. Certainly, future meetings is one. Any did you capture any others from tonight that we need to call out?
Well, we seem to have a number of proposed guest speakers. They'll have to get scheduled. And is there a call tomorrow? I had on my calendar that there might be a call for tomorrow to be available.
Oh,
Well, I think that would, yeah, I think that's gonna have to be made public, right?
no, that was having to do with if the Patterson Farm Preservation Group were available. I was making myself available to have a conversation to talk about their presentation at a future meeting. They've not committed to it, so there's no call tomorrow. No.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
So then our future meeting is October 13th.
And that's
Is that correct?
Kurt, that's the one township building.
So, yeah, so just so we're talking about the same thing, but that's the working meeting that you're talking about, Dennis, correct?
We were talking about a working meeting in the township building,
Yes.
a public meeting
Yes.
on Monday, the 4th at 7 o'clock. Were we not?
Yes, that is correct. I'm sorry. I'm keeping so when she said the 13th and you said the working meeting, I'm just trying to keep the meeting straight. So the
Okay.
working meeting that we're talking about is on the 4th, correct? That's next week, correct?
Yes,
Okay, so
that's what we were talking about. Right.
you want to talk about that meeting, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry,
so-
let's start with that one.
So in the end, I know there was a discussion with the committee, and I apologize, I wasn't at the last meeting. Even when we have working meetings, that may not be all that on the surface exciting for the public to come and watch you all enter in data or do things. It still is a public meeting that we have to have. So that meeting on the 4th that we would have at the township building, we will have staff. If any of you have been in that building, we have the great big screen TVs where we can have the effect of allowing whomever, if that would be Dennis, your computer, one of ours, what have you, to plug in and to put that up on the big screen. If you all are entering information or want to talk about various things, we can even set you all distanced around there. There would be a section where the public could come in and it would be conducted the same way. While you're doing your work, you would just provide for the opportunity for public comment. Listen, someone, they may come, probably not, but we just have that venue where the building would be open. And we'll have you all set up. Dennis, if you want to do something in advance with staff to just make sure that there's not any technological issues as far as plugging in and putting that up on the TV, we can do a practice run with you earlier in the day or on Friday or whatever works for you.
Okay. So first, let me say, I mean, this was via some combinations of email. Is the full committee available on October 4th? It's Monday evening, October 4th. I put it down at 7. I don't know if we really talked about a time. Is Bet you're available? I see Fred. Yes.
I'm
James.
available virtually. I would have to call in, but yes, I am available.
Okay.
So just so we're aware, I'd have to look and see. We don't have the ability for these committees to do hybrid meetings. They're either hybrid or they're in person, because we then would have to engage staff at the building to interface all of these things. So James, if we could try to arrange something where we could send an invite out and, try to work to incorporate you into that. If we can, we'll look to see if we can do that.
I mean, whatever it has to be, if it's just, I'm on someone's laptop on a Zoom call,
Yeah.
so that people can hear me and I can hear them, that's also fine by me.
Yeah, if we could put maybe James just on a speakerphone and have him dial in,
We could do that as well.
Okay. John, I saw you said you were available? I
I'm
see-
available on the 4th, yes.
Okay, Sarah? Yes, okay. All right.
Yes. Sorry.
Dennis, I know you were speaking to my assistant, Katie. Did she talk?
Yes.
She advertised that meeting, correct?
That's how we left off, that she was going to, make it a public meeting and give the due notices, etc. I have no idea if that's been done, but that was how we ended the conversation.
Dennis, were you still able to be there?
Yes,
Dennis?
yes, I can be there.
Okay. I think originally there was, you weren't sure or
Right.
dates were different or something.
I know. I think I've reconciled that. All right, so 7 o'clock on the,
The 4th.
okay. So let's get that on everyone's calendar. And then we had previously, I believe, booked one of these Zoom meetings for 7:30 on the 13th. Is that correct? Is that what you have, Kurt and Bet?
That's what I have. I will be away that week. Plans came up.
Other committee members available on the 13th for this type of Zoom?
Oh, it's going to be Zoom? I could do a Zoom.
Yes. That Dennis, that date is right. 7:30. on October 13th. That is correct. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I can call in.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. So James, Sarah, Fred, John, you're all good? Okay. And I think that was as far out as we went. Is that right, Kurt? And I'll take your guidance, Kurt, on how far out we need to go to get these Zoom time slots that the township have available. Do we need to look at November dates at this point?
Listen, we're all here. So what I'd suggest is if you want to come up with 1 or 2 dates, we can get those, we can get those in front of Katie as far as starting to get those scheduled versus exchanging emails back over 2 or 3 days, which I think we can probably do in 2 or 3 minutes here if you wanted to do that.
Okay. All right. So if we're meeting October 13th, can we look at a meeting date the week of November 8th? Are there any dates that are particularly problematic for anyone that week?
The 27th in the night, in the evening, I'm not available.
Okay. Well, let's look at the first half of the month there. The 11th is Veterans Day. These time slots, Kurt, they're usually available. What? Tuesday, Wednesday. Give me a little guidance there.
Well, I'll give you the best guidance I can. The Board of Supervisors meets the first and third Wednesdays of every month. The Planning Commission, Fred typically is Fred Weiss. I believe the Planning Commission or the Zoning Hearing Board are on Tuesdays, and I think that same week, the first and third Tuesday, they're generally reserved for them.
Okay.
But this I was going to say, if we can get a couple of dates, I'm happy to sit and run them through and have Katie email you all out saying you gave these dates, this one or these 2 are available, and we can try to match it up if you'd like to do that. We have 14 different committees, so at times, there's a lot of juggling that goes on. And I know 7:30 is convenient, but for the committee, if there's ever a time that you felt like you wanted to start earlier than that, even that could also provide additional opportunities. We have certain committees that have met at 5 o'clock and stuff. There's no rules or regulations. We just have to advertise. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, I think going forward, earlier, if possible, would be better for me. So that would just be my preference. But
What are we talking about, James? How early? 7, 5?
7
a.m.
6.
Yeah, I don't know if we can go. I have little humans, so let's
Thinking the practice time for sports.
yeah.
And even if you all wanted to start at 7, you know what I mean, which might, even if, that's still whatever you all want to do.
All right. Well, right now, let's see if we can lock in some dates.
How's the second Tuesday in November, the 9th?
Right. The 9th. The second Tuesday, there were no other committees in that second week. So that's likely.
Right.
Was
And
this,
then we could fit in the 5th Tuesday, because that's like nothing's ever routinely scheduled for that, which would be the 30th.
I'm not available the 9th, but
yeah,
of November.
I also can't do
okay.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't want to be well, there's 2 of us, right?
Does the Thursday work better for you, Sarah?
I'm out that week. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
that's just,
that
yeah.
week is out? Okay.
Well, so maybe that Monday, but past that, it would be that week. So that's why I don't want to, I'm available the week before and the week after.
Okay. Okay. What's the what's the 16th of November look like, the Tuesday of the third week?
That would likely be a day that would have to be reserved for the zoning hearing board.
Well, you said that my apologies.
Okay.
The
But you could do the Monday, the 15th, or Monday, the 1st. Monday's work.
Yeah.
Is this a Zoom call?
Yes.
A Zoom call. Could I suggest Monday, excuse me, Monday, or Thursday, the 15th or 18th, that third week, the Monday and Thursdays. Your standing meetings going. Does that look?
Looks good.
I think the
Sorry, what
18th
day did
would
you
be
say?
best
I'm
for
sorry.
me.
15 and 18, Monday and Thursday of the third week. 15 and 18.
I would prefer the 18th if we can.
Does 18 work for committee? Hearing no objections? Okay.
So bear with me. Let me ask this question. So we have the 18th. I hate to ask you to do this, but I'm gonna. So I will coordinate that obviously through Katie. Just
Thank you.
a trail of emails back and forth. Could we come up with like a second date in the event the 18th does not work? I'm sorry, I know that that's painful to get a date. I know that. But
So you said, James, the 15th did not work for you?
No, the 15th still works. I would just prefer to do the 18th. So we could do 15th as a backup.
All right, so 15 as a fallback, does that work?
Sarah, are
for
you okay with that? Are you okay with Sarah, the backup date being the 15th?
I've lost track. We're in October, correct?
November.
November.
Oh,
No.
yes, the 15th is that week is fine. Yes.
So we would have the first primary date is the 18th and the second date is the 15th.
Yeah.
So, Sarah, and I appreciate the dilemma you're in there. Typically, a lot of times I've had when she was 4, face in the window to tell me during a supervisor's meeting that she had to go to the bathroom right in that window right there. So I know how
We're real close. I hear them calling at the door, so we're
Yeah.
close right now.
Yeah, I got you. All right, so Dennis, I'll set the plan
Thank
A
you.
being November 18th, plan B being the 15th, but we'll try real hard to make it the 18th. Okay.
Great, thank you.
And the committee wants to keep it at 7:30. Is that right?
I think we wanted to move it to 7.
You want to go to 7?
If it doesn't get it, is that all right with Sarah and John? I heard sports and kids, so tell
Oh,
me.
yeah, Sarah.
I'm better at 7:30, but I can do 7. So it's not, I mean, it is what it is. It's fine.
I'm better at 7:30 as well, but I mean, I can make it work.
If it's painful for other folks at 7:30, then
Let's
it.
try 7. If it's going to be a problem, we'll go back to 7:30 if we have to. But let's give 7 a shot.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. All right. I think we've concluded for the evening. With that, I'd like to close the meeting. Do I have a motion?
I move.
Very good. Seconded.
Right
Second.
second.
And all in favor? Let's adjourn till next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Be in touch. Thanks for all your